So we are very honoured to have him to come and talk in Cannock. Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Nuttall.
Do you want me to use the microphone for the shake-up video?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me here tonight. It's an honour to be speaking on the same platform as Christopher. First and foremost, Christopher was on the NEC all those years ago when I was the chairman of the party, and he was a rock really when we were going through some very difficult times. And Christopher certainly was one of the people who saved this party when we'd hit our lowest point back in 2008, when the party was on the brink of going to the wall, really. And Christopher was one of the saviours who helped get the party ready for the 2009 European elections, where we went on as a result of the hard work of people like Christopher, and we finished second, beating Gordon Brown's Labour government of the day. So thank you very much, Christopher. Of course, it's an honour to be on the platform with Graham as well. Isn't it interesting that we're doing so well in the polls here in Cannock Chase? I knew something was going on when I came here in the March of last year. What had happened is the party had double booked me. They double booked me for an evening here in Cannock Chase, and also for a gala dinner in Torquay. It was the night before the spring conference in Torquay, as we were getting ready for those European elections. But obviously I chose to come to Cannock Chase instead, and I was shocked by what I found, because when I turned up, the room was absolutely packed, it was bouncing, and it was at that point that I realised that something is obviously going on in this constituency, and obviously this branch is connecting with the local people, and the polls now are bearing that out. If you look now, you've got 6 councillors, you're the official opposition here on Cannock Chase. You're really making inroads with local people, and if you continue to campaign and you focus and you target and you get round every single door and you speak to people and tell them what UKIP stands for, I guarantee you that come May the 8th, Graham will be sitting as your MP in the House of Commons. And you've done so well here in the West Midlands. I love coming down here, one, because it's close, but mainly because, you know, I appreciate the work that is going on here. You just look at the number of councillors you've got right across the region now. This region has grown in size. I think it's trebled in the past 4 years in terms of numbers. You've now got 3 MEPs who sit in the European Parliament, and they're doing a fantastic job on your behalf. Bill Etheridge is targeting Dudley North and is doing very well indeed on behalf of the party. Jill Seymour is excelling in her role as transport spokesman, and some of the work that Jimmy Carver is doing in terms of the Commonwealth and working within with communities as far and wide as Somaliland, and with representatives from South Arabia. I mean, he really is getting his teeth into it and doing a fantastic job on our behalf. Nationally, the party is on the move. We've now got around 44,000 members, more than the Liberal Democrats. We're polling with the poll of polls, the polls that really matter, which is the average poll, the average of all the polls. We're polling somewhere around 15%. Now, people might say, oh, you're going down in the polls. That just simply isn't true. The UKIP vote is holding up. In fact, we've gone up in the polls since the last week of March. And I tell you now, if someone would have said to me the day after the European elections that UKIP would be polling 15% just 25 days before the general election, I would have bitten your hands off. We are on target to change politics in this country. And the reason why we're on target to do it is because we are connecting with normal people. The politicians at Westminster are detached. The days of the politics of deference are over. It's about the politics of empathy now. We want our politicians to look and sound and act like us, like normal people. We want our politicians to give straight answers to straight questions. We want our politicians to say what they mean and mean what they say, and not make empty gestures. And in UKIP, we're doing this because what we are laying down are common sense solutions. Take, for example, on the issue of immigration. We don't believe it makes any sense whatsoever to allow a city the size of Hull to come into your country every single year net. That is 298,000 people alone last year. And we don't think that makes any sense when we've got almost 1 million of our own people between 18 and 24 who are out of work. It is crazy when almost 2 million people are unemployed in this country to saturate the employment market even further. And what we're saying is we want to reduce the numbers back to sensible levels. We want to see net immigration into this country return to around 30,000 per year. And how would we do that? We would do it through having a simple Australian points-based system whereby if you've got the skills that this country requires, you can come here and work on a visa. But we will never allow people to come into this country and take out of the system without ever putting in first. And there's nothing racist or xenophobic about that. There's nothing racist about saying we want British jobs for British workers. We want employers to put British candidates for jobs first. It was the Labour Party, wasn't it, who allowed 3 million people net to come to this country between 1997 and 2010. And they would scream racist at anybody who piped up and said that they were concerned about immigration. And they would shut down debate on multiculturalism, forced multiculturalism. And they would do it by, again, shouting, you're a xenophobe, you're a racist. And people then became afraid to speak out. And where did this fear get us? Well, I'll tell you where it got us. It got us Rochdale. It got us Rotherham. It got us Derby. It got us Oxford. It got whole communities letting down girls who were being abused. And no one would speak out or pipe up because they were afraid of being called a racist. And in UKIP, we're saying that isn't good enough. On defence, we're talking common sense. We're the only party that is committed to upholding our 2% commitment that we have given to NATO, that we will spend 2% of GDP on the defence budget, because we don't think it makes any sense to be cutting the defence budget when the globe is in a pretty precarious position. You've only got to see what's going on in Ukraine and indeed in the Middle East. And indeed, if Cameron and Haig would have got their way, we would have been arming these so-called rebels in Syria, who turned out to be Islamic State. So Islamic State would now be killing people using weapons that the British had given them. Isn't it crazy? And what we're saying in UKIP is, although we do want to continue with that 2% of GDP spent on defence, we will only engage in wars around the world where it is in the British national interest, and we do not believe that the wars that the governments, Tory and Labour, over the past 15 years have involved us in have been in our interest. They haven't, and we've sent young boys and girls out to fight and die in some cases in wars which aren't in our interest and, quite frankly, should have been nothing to do with us. And we want to look after our veterans when they return. We're the only party that is committed to upholding the military covenant, which is an agreement between the people and the boys and girls who serve in our armed forces, that they will be looked after when they return. Can you believe that 1 in 10 of homeless people in Britain are veterans? It is a disgraceful statistic, and we would sort this out. And the way we would start is by ensuring that there would be a job in the border force, in the police force, or in the prison service for any veteran that has served 12 years or more in the armed services, because they have shown commitment to us. Therefore, we believe in UKIP, we should show commitment to them. On transport, common sense. We do not believe there is any need in this country for a vanity project which is going to cost £50 billion over the next 20 years. A vanity project, HS2, which isn't going to benefit the Black Country. It isn't going to benefit Liverpool. It isn't going to benefit Lancaster or Newcastle or anywhere else. It is a vanity project which is there for the benefit of one place and one place only, and that is London. And what we're saying in UKIP is it cannot be right, ladies and gentlemen, that in London they get £5,500 per head spent on them, on infrastructure. Up here in the West Midlands, it's just over £350. That cannot be right. We want to decentralise government. We want to hand more power back to local councils and indeed more power to local people. And the way we will do that is through direct democracy. We are the only party that will trust the people through local referendums. If you do not want to see that wind farm built on the hill overlooking your village, or if you do not want a Tesco to be built on your doorstep, or indeed your sports stadium to be closed down, what we would allow is local people to call local referendums, and we will trust the views of the people over politicians every single time. And of course the NHS, simple common sense. We want to see more money invested in the NHS. In the end, we want to see £3 billion a year invested in our National Health Service. And it must be a national health service, not an international health service, and we will make savings. We will save £2 billion per annum by doing away with health tourism. If you want to come to this country, you should have medical insurance. You should never be allowed to use our service without ever paying in beforehand. And people say, where will you find the money to pay for this investment in the NHS? Well, we say it's quite clear. Where we will take the money from is the foreign aid budget. A foreign aid budget which is now costing this country £32 million every single day. And we are giving money to countries that need it. We are giving money to countries where there's been Ebola crises, countries where there are starving children. But equally at the same time, we're giving money to countries that are richer than ourselves. We're giving money, for example, to China, which is going to be the largest economy on the planet by 2050. We're giving money to Brazil, which has overtaken us in the League of Economic Powers. We're giving money to Argentina, which saber rattles over the Falklands and has just only a few weeks ago gone out and bought a load of jets, fighter jets from Russia. We're giving money to India with its own space program, its own nuclear weapons, its own aircraft carriers. It has more millionaires and billionaires than ourselves. And what we're saying in UKIP is simple common sense. You shouldn't be doing that when 1 million of your own people last year were forced to use food banks. What we want to see is that the vast majority of that £32 million a day spent here, spent in our country, spent on our own people, spent on our schools, spent on our National Health Service, spent on our transport network, spent on ensuring that our boys and girls in the armed forces have the best equipment possible. And do you know why? Because we in UKIP believe charity begins at home. And of course, Christopher spoke briefly about the European Union. £55 million every single day to be members of a club that hasn't had its account signed off for 19 years on the bounce. Indeed, if the European Union was a business, then the whole of the board, the chief executive, the chairman, they'd all be in prison.
That's about right.
It is corrupt to the core, yet we still hand money over to this organisation. And of course, they give us half back. And then we are expected to say thank you very much. We're expected to put signs up all over Birmingham, all over Wolverhampton, Walsall, Stafford, which say thank the European Union. This project was built with European money. There is no such thing as European money. It's our own money which goes to Brussels, and they give us half back, and they then tell us how to spend our own money, yet in the other half is spent on building motorways in Romania, an underground system in Warsaw, a sewage system in Budapest. And I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, wouldn't it make more sense to keep that money in our own island and spent on our own people? Again, it's like foreign aid, isn't it? And what do we really get for this? Well, 70% of our laws now are made in this country. In fact, this election is really about around 30% of the laws. And how are these laws made? Well, they're not made in the European Parliament by MEPs like myself, who are elected. They're made in a building about a mile away from the European Parliament called the Parliament Building. And in that building, 28 European commissioners meet in secret, unelected, and they write up the legislation advised by 3,000 working groups. And in these working groups, we know who sits on them. It's big business, it's the corporates, it's the multinationals, it's the pharmaceutical industry, it's the tobacco industry, and these characters are handing down the legislation. And it's all done in secret, and that's why it's a lobbyist stream. There are more lobbyists in Brussels than there are in Washington, DC. It's absolutely bonkers. And what we're saying in UK is that that cannot be right. It cannot be right that 70% of our laws are now made in a foreign country by foreign politicians who are unelected and who meet in secret. And did we really fight 2 world wars in the last century for this to be the case? Did we really send our boys onto the beaches of Normandy and D-Day for this to be the case? And did we really send our boys into the skies over South England in the Battle of Britain for 70% of our laws now to be made in a foreign country? I don't believe that we did. And what we're saying in UKIP is shame on those politicians in the latter half of the last century, and shame on those politicians in the first decade of this, who handed away something that was never theirs to give. They handed away the sovereignty of the British people, and we in UKIP are committed to taking it back. And of course, Dave Cameron promises a referendum on this. And indeed, you hear the political commentators saying, oh, what's the point going out and voting UKIP? You're only going to let Labour in and you're going to stop a referendum. Well, there's a number of problems with this. Firstly, he's promised us a referendum before, hasn't he? On the Lisbon Treaty, only to renege on it as soon as the European elections of 2009 were out of the way. And then his excuse was, you can't have retrospective referendums. Well, we entered the European Economic Community in 1973, and as far as I'm aware, Christopher, I wasn't born at that point, but the referendum was in 1975, wasn't it? Right. Which, I'm no Carol Vorderman, but I'm pretty sure 1975 is after 1973. So the idea that you can't have retrospective referendums is utter bunkum. The next point, he'll only have this referendum after a renegotiation. But how can you renegotiate with an organisation that has made it perfectly clear it doesn't want to renegotiate? He's been told by Hollande, he's been told by Merkel, he's been told by Donald Tusk, the President of the European Council, he's been told by Jean-Claude Juncker. They don't want to renegotiate the biggest issue of all, which is freedom of movement of peoples, which is a pillar of the European community. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a nonsense, this referendum. And what we're saying in UKIP is, yes, we want a referendum, but we don't want a referendum in 2017, because by that point, you would have handed over another £50 billion to this corrupt organisation in fees. And what we're saying is simply this. We've waited since 1975 for this vote. If you're under 58, you've never had the opportunity to vote on this issue. We've waited long enough. We want a referendum, but we want a referendum now. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to finish by saying, well done. You're doing a fantastic job here in Cannock Chase. You've got the other parties on the run. You're in quite a unique position, really, because you don't have an incumbent, because obviously Aidan Bailey is standing down after a rather strange incident in Switzerland, wasn't it, or France. But you don't have an incumbent, which means that you've got nobody with a track record. Everyone is starting on an equal footing. You did excellently here in the local elections. You did fantastically in the European elections. And if you keep that momentum going, I'm telling you now, I could be sitting on BBC or Sky on election night and it could flash up, Cannock Chase has gone UKIP. Thank you.